I think the kids that are younger, where the brain has what we call more neural plasticity, they will tend to do better. But the older kids are really, I think, going to struggle.
One of the children was found unable to speak, and another couldn't identify their own name. They were just kids living in a house. That dry line from the initial sheriff's report on the Omar Street property is the first public crack in what would become a truly disturbing facade. Before we go deeper into what the records actually show, make sure you're subscribed to the Crime Infinity, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. This is the story of a house. Not the kind you see in the movies with peeling wallpaper and a dark attic. This was a physical space where the most basic human functions ceased to be private, where time stopped, and where the hierarchy between the isolated and the isolators created a pocket universe of normalized chaos. The case that has come to be known as the Ohio House of Horrors is anchored by a single perplexing question that the prosecution and the defense will fight over. Can the kids, finally free of that environment, tell the whole truth? Or have the secrets of that house been baked into them so deeply that the truth, when it emerges, will come not in clear sentences, but in fragmented, terrifying echoes? We know the initial facts. On June 30th, law enforcement executed a search warrant at a house on Omar Street in Vinton County, Ohio. Inside, they found 16 children and 4 adults: Gary Ciders Jr., Elizabeth Ciders, and the grandparents, Gary Sr. and Christina.
Ciders children are in therapeutic foster care, receiving treatment for their physical needs and for emotional trauma. 6 of the children are younger, 3 sets of twins, but there are older children who will likely be able to tell investigators and children's services workers the story of what has gone on in their lives over the last decade or longer. The children, as we've been telling you, were removed from this house on Omar Street on June 30th as law enforcement executed a search warrant as they investigated a crime that to this day remains a secret. But what secrets and stories will these children tell? That's a question that we just don't have the answer to right now. But those children have likely been interviewed already. And that...
The conditions were immediately described as inhumane. Sheriff reports noted the house was littered with trash, bugs, and even feces on the floor. The livestock, the sheriff famously remarked, were treated better. Yet in this pit of filth, one bizarre element contradicted the total isolation that officials suspected. The older kids, specifically, were active on social media. Their parents, Gary Jr. and Elizabeth, remain in the Southeast Ohio Regional Jail, charged with child endangering. The grandparents, Gary Sr. and Christina, face the same 16 charges, though Gary Sr. was briefly released for a serious medical condition. But it's the kids, the evidence, who are now split up in therapeutic foster care across different counties. The state has poured emergency funds into Vinton County just to manage the logistics of their care. Therapeutic foster care is expensive, averaging up to $250 a day per child, and the county could not afford this onslaught. This is the fiscal reality of a tragedy unfolding in real time. But the emotional reality is far more complex. Here is where the narrative splits. The prosecutors will look to the older children, the 18-year-old and the 16-year-old, to be their star witnesses. They have social media histories. They had access, somehow, to a world outside the walls. They posted videos, they followed accounts, they interacted. And in those posts, they left breadcrumbs. One account carried a caption describing a feeling of being uncomfortable hugging their own
appear to have had social media accounts. I've linked these by looking at who the children are friends with and who they follow, and these accounts appear to belong to the kids. One video shows cats, and it looks like it was taken outside that home on Omar Street with the walkway from the house, that leads to the driveway area. Others are reposted videos that show references to relationships. One has a caption that reads, "How I felt after feeling uncomfortable hugging my own dad." Another states, "Everyone yelling at me like, damn, I'm trying." Another states, "Me seeing a little girl spending time / having fun with her dad. I used to be a daddy's little girl." And another shows a scene from a movie or a TV show, and it shows a father yelling at his child. The caption, "My dad since I started being a teenager because I changed and I'm not the little girl he used to love anymore." Again, I've looked at these accounts and looked at who each account follows and interacts with, and these appear to be the kids. All of these are incredibly sad. It could be teenage children feeling angst, but keep in mind, the environment we were told they were living in is just awful. You know, running a business is tough enough, but why make it harder doing things manually or relying on dozens of apps that don't?
Another shared a video of a father yelling with the caption, "My dad since I started being a teenager because I changed and I'm not the little girl he used to love anymore." These weren't just teenage angst posts. They were windows into a home where the emotional toxicity matched the physical decay. They told the world they were hurting. But here lies the ticking clock moment. When those kids are finally placed in a room with a forensic psychiatrist, will they even be able to articulate the horrors they witnessed? Or will their memories, fragmented by years of deprivation, serve as a shield for the very people who starved them? The process of interviewing these children is a race against the fragility of memory and the risk of re-traumatization, a process that, if botched, could destroy the entire case. To get to the truth, investigators have to act fast. Forensic psychiatrists like Dr. Daniel Bober, who has weighed in on similar cases, stress that the first interview is the only interview that truly matters.
We should make clear that you obviously, you haven't evaluated the children. You're just looking at everything that we're reading and the public is reading. So if you say you encounter these children or you're the person assigned to help these children through counseling, because right now they're in what's called therapeutic foster care. How do you go about interviewing these kids? Because you're talking about this deprivation, that they've been kind of isolated. I would assume that these are going to be some kids potentially either who are yearning for help or maybe have issues trusting adults.
Right. So I think there's two main aspects to this. There's obviously the therapeutic part, which is we want to provide a nurturing environment where these children can thrive and recover. But obviously, there's also a prosecution to think about. And so if we're going to interview them, we want to interview them in a way that is neutral, that doesn't re-traumatize them. And we want to keep it, very open-ended, giving them the opportunity to speak freely in a narrative format so that we're not tainting the evidence for a potential prosecution.
Mm-hmm. So
the brain is not a hard drive. It's a living organ that rewrites itself with repetition. The more you ask a child to recall a trauma, the more you risk overwriting the original memory, contaminating the evidence for a potential prosecution. This case is further complicated by the fact that the kids have likely suffered from psychosocial dwarfism, a condition triggered by extreme emotional trauma and deprivation that suppresses growth hormones. They are stunted. They are unwell.
Deeply, I want to bring in Dr. Daniel Bober. He is a forensic psychiatrist. He works with teens and also conducts forensic interviews as a forensic psychiatrist. So, Dr. Bober, thanks for coming back on. It's been a little bit.
Great to see you.
Tell me a little bit about, first of all, your thoughts on this case. We have a family of 4, grandparents and, parents living in a house that law enforcement says was just disgusting. And 16 kids are in this house. It's like a 1,500 square foot house.
Well, when I think about the condition that these children were found in, what I think about is what's called psychosocial dwarfism or deprivation dwarfism. And this is a rare phenomenon that occurs when children are exposed to extreme emotional trauma, environmental deprivation, and chronic neglect. And essentially what's happening is there's a chronic fight or flight response which causes growth hormone to be suppressed in the pituitary gland and
Mm.
forces the child into a biological survival mode, stunting their growth and development. And this is what I'm seeing here when I look at some of these reports. And it's very rare indeed. And it shows a chronic pattern of abuse, neglect, and deprivation over years, and what it can do to alter a child's physiology and development.
Mm.
The adults in this case, the parents and the grandparents, have pleaded not guilty. Their defense is poverty. They claim they were just a poor family trying to survive. But the evidence on the scene tells a different story. This wasn't just poverty. It was a state of total neglect that suggests a deeper pathology. How could grandparents who were known to live cleanly in the past, who looked presentable in family photos, descend into living like this? The defense will try to spin this as a family in crisis, but the prosecution will point to the effort it took to hide these kids. They hadn't been enrolled in school for at least 6 years.
Records and law enforcement claim that the children haven't been to school, at least in the last 6 years. But have they ever been to school? We don't know. We know they had to be registered since Gary Jr. and Elizabeth were cited for their 6 older children being habitually truant back in 2021. That case never moved forward because investigators couldn't find the parents in Gallia County to serve them with the paperwork. But the older children...
When the county tried to serve them truancy papers in 2021, they couldn't find them. This wasn't just falling through the cracks. It was an active effort to stay hidden. They were hiding the kids. There is a damning phrase that echoes through this case. They were hidden in plain sight. They were hidden in plain sight, hiding behind the walls of a house while posting cryptic cries for help on social media for the world to see. They were hidden in plain sight, hiding from the state but leaving digital footprints that prosecutors will now use to map the family's psychological landscape. They were hidden in plain sight. And yet, the kids themselves might now be the only ones who can confirm whether the abuse was merely neglect or something far more sinister. The unanswered question in this case is not just what happened, but what will happen to the truth. The kids are in therapeutic foster care, receiving treatment. The younger children, with brains that still possess neuroplasticity, have a shot at normal development. They might even forget the filth. But the older kids, they are the prosecution's case. They are the key witnesses who will stand before the grand jury. But how reliable will their testimony be after years of living in a reality divorced from normal society? Their memories might be warped by the very chaos they are trying to escape. And what about the adults? The gag order requested by Gary Jr.'s lawyer has silenced public discussion, but it can't silence the evidence that came out of that house.
As all of this is going on, the court process is moving forward. Gary Jr.'s lawyer, who requested and was granted a sweeping gag order, has filed a request for a bill of particulars. That's a legal document that demands specific details from the prosecution about the crimes alleged. That request is usually filed after a defendant has been indicted, but that hasn't happened yet. But the prosecutor is preparing the case for the grand jury. The interviews of the children, though, particularly the older children, will be very important. So how will investigators and social workers go about interviewing these children so they are not further traumatized? And how do they keep any information from possibly tainting those interviews?
The investigation is moving toward a grand jury, and the bill of particulars will eventually detail the specific allegations. The House of Horrors is a phrase the media will latch onto, but we at the Crime Infinity are more interested in the House of Questions. We have the official reports, we have the social media posts, we have the timeline of their evasive moves to hide from the law. We know that in late May, Gary Jr. was charged with 4 misdemeanor counts of public indecency for exposing himself to someone outside the family. That charge is a loose thread, and pulling it might unravel the entire tapestry of what was really going on.
Christina Ciders, Elizabeth Ciders, and Gary Jr. all remain in jail. They're being held on a $300,000 bond each. Gary Jr. is scheduled to appear in court later this week for a pre-trial hearing on 4 misdemeanor counts of public indecency that he faces. Those charges relate to alleged incidents at the Ciders home in late May, in which law enforcement say Gary Jr. exposed himself to someone who was not a family member. The nature of that charge, though, remains unclear at this point. So stay tuned.
As the grand jury gets ready to hear the evidence, we are left with one final call to research. I urge you to look at the Vinton County Sheriff's Office official press release from July 1st of that year. It is a dry, bureaucratic document, 2 paragraphs long, outlining the arrests. It says nothing about the condition of the house or the state of the children. Read that document and the subsequent court filings. Then ask yourself one question and leave your answer in the comments. Do you believe the children, after years of psychological manipulation, will be able to testify truthfully? Or will their trauma prevent them from being effective witnesses against their own family? Like, share, and subscribe to The Crime Infinity, and make sure to turn on notifications. We'll be right here, following the evidence.